Test 1, 2, not, we have, yeah, there it is, okay. Thank you. The Chief of Police solved our problem. Thank you much, Kevin.
He just knew what to call.
Good morning. Welcome to our third Coffee with the Legislators. I'm Michael Held, and I'll be your moderator this morning. These are organized by the Government Affairs Committee of the Huron Chamber and Visitors Bureau. We have several of the committee members in the audience. If you just raise your hand, please. Thanks for your work. And also Lori Shelton is the President and CEO of the Huron Chamber. I would remind you to please turn your cell phones off or put them on vibrate so we don't disturb this. We are going to open with a moment of silence in memory of what's going on in the people of Ukraine and try and keep them in our thoughts this morning. Thank you. We're happy to have our three legislators here this morning. I want to recognize the Huron Plainsman Performance Radio. You can view this at the Huron, South Dakota website on YouTube. We're going to start with opening statements from our three legislators. Then we'll have your questions. You can, if you want to ask a question, please come to the podium and identify yourself. Or if you'd like to write down a question, Arnie has cards and a pen. Raise your hand and he'll bring you a card and a pen to write down your questions. We're going to begin with opening statements with Representative Roger Chase. Roger?
Thank you, Mike, and good morning to everybody for being here this morning. We've got 7 weeks down. We've got 2 weeks to go, and it is getting pretty tense out in Pierre. I told my wife last night I think we need to take 2 weeks off and just get away from everybody for 2 weeks and then come back and try to finish session. We have a real issue with spending. I have the budget request for special projects in South Dakota. The request is $2.2 billion. And everybody wants their piece of the pie. And we've got a ton of federal money this year that we're working through. And everybody wants their project funded. It's kind of like if all of us put $1 in the kitty and went and bought a lottery ticket and we won $50 million. We'd all have different ideas and different purposes of what we should do with that money, whether we invest it, whether we spend it, and where we put it. And in my 6 years, I've never seen it like this, to where we've got so many people at each other's throats trying to cut deals to get their projects funded. And that's unfortunate, because there's a lot of good projects that are out there. There's a lot of projects that have a lot of fluff in them. And it's getting tense. I've never seen it like this in 6 years, but we'll get through it. We've got a short weekend. We're going to get right back at it on Monday. There's been a lot of bills that have come through that have barely made it through one chamber or another, that I think the other chamber will take care of some of the bad legislation that has passed from one chamber to the other. That's the great part about our legislative process, is that we've got 2 houses, 2 committees, 2 chambers, and ultimately the governor. And I think the governor might have a little more veto power and a number of vetoes coming her way when we get closer to the end of the session. So hang in there. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Look forward to the discussion as well.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Representative Lynn Schneider.
Thank you, Mike, and my pleasure to welcome all of you here too. Glad you took the time, made the priority to come out and ask us your questions or hear what you think we might have to say. You know, this is my third, actually fourth one. We actually did one last Monday in a new part of our district, starting next year, of course, is in Redfield. And so we were invited to participate up there. And I was just going to say that the three of us, at least we haven't checked our notes with each other before we come to these to say, well, you talk about that, I'll talk about this. So interestingly, what you just heard from Representative Chase say, that was completely on my mind here of what I'd like to talk about this morning, but you know, as he talks about the process and all that I still have to learn, you've heard terms like hog house bills and smoke out and reconsider. And we're seeing a number of that stuff going on. Even this being just my second year compared to last year, there's a lot more of it. There's something that we call vehicle bills that are just like a shell that get introduced early on, so it's like a placeholder that maybe late in the session, if there's some special need or bill or goal that somebody wanted to do that you couldn't get done before the crossover day happened on Wednesday, and both houses use that, and a lot of times to good effect, but it really is unfortunate of the stress that we're seeing, and it almost all comes down over money. But in the end, I guess I too have to trust the system that it does work out at the end. It's this process that so often gets labeled as sausage making. And man, if you've ever been around making sausage, as messy as you can imagine, that's what this has been feeling like, especially the last few days. So I just need to convince myself to hang in there, because we can trust the process. Things that are supposedly killed in committee or here or there, there's a chance sometimes for them to get reconsidered. There's times for them to get smoked out. They can reappear on the other house in a totally different bill that would have been a hog house type thing. In one way, it's really fascinating to me. I'm trying to keep myself to a point where I don't get too frustrated over it, but it's good, the kind of process we have with basically, again, at least 5 steps. Respective committee of lead houses, that's 2 of them. The houses themselves, or chambers, that's 2 more. And finally, the governor. And something that has died along the way, sometimes you think of it's maybe like a cat that has 9 lives. There's a lot of ways to bring it back to life. So hopefully that prevails with the really critical things that need to be done, and maybe sometimes you can bring something back next year. But with all this money coming up in front of us, hopefully most of it's going to get used in the wisest way we could. So thank you.
Thank you. And Senator David Wheeler?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for, again, coming out here today. Representative Schneider mentioned that this week we had crossover day. Crossover day is a deadline the legislature imposes on itself to get all of the bills out of the first house. And so all the Senate bills had to be passed by the Senate by that day if they're going to survive. And all the House bills had to pass the House by that day, and that was Wednesday. What that does, that makes that week, especially that Wednesday, it can be a long calendar day. You can't defer anything. You can't push it off anymore. You can't try and work it. Your deal's got to get done if you're going to get it out of your house by that day. And so that makes that Tuesday and Wednesday can be some long days, and there's a lot of those days can be hectic, and they can be stressful because a lot of work has to get done to do that. And so then we move into the period now where the Senate is now only dealing with House bills, and the House is only dealing with Senate bills. So they've gotten past one chamber. Now we're seeing what's happening, and that's where you're really seeing whether your idea, your bill can survive in the other house where you're not at. And so I got my idea, I have a lot of ability to help. I can, easier to talk with the senators who I'm with on a daily basis, my committee members. I can, it's easier to get a bill through your own house. It's harder to get a bill through the other house because you don't have as much of a close relationship, because you don't work with them as closely every day. And so your idea has to be good enough to survive that other house and kind of be able to fly on its own and get through there. And so that's where we're seeing what ideas can kind of fly on their own and survive the process that is the legislature. So it's an exciting time in the legislature. As he said, you're going to see all sorts of procedural moves made in the next 2 weeks to try and keep bills alive and resurrect ones that we thought were dead. And I'm seeing it now on ideas that we've had over in the Senate, and so I'm happy to be around to answer your questions, and I look forward to seeing what's on your mind.
Thank you, Senator. So we're ready for your questions. Who would like to ask the first question? Please come to the podium and identify yourself. Somebody's gotta be first. Okay, come on, Jerry.
I have a couple of thoughts. It's Gary Kaufman from Huron, and a couple of thoughts. First, I'd like to commend Senator Wheeler for his efforts on Senate Bill 167, which related to clarifying a statute in the education code related to the professional code of ethics. And so his assistance was really appreciated. Second thing, very briefly, I guess these are really directed to Representative Chase and Representative Schneider, because they are now in the House, and I know neither of you are on the House Ed Committee, and I don't believe neither one of you are on the House State Affairs Committee. And these are the bills that I would just like you to respond to, if you may, and if you're maybe or not aware of. One is Senate Bill 104 that talks about provisions related to elections in sparse school districts. Doesn't relate to the Huron School District, but what it says essentially is that the bill says that local school districts no longer control decision-making when it comes to voting precincts within their own school district. And I would ask you to take a look at it and maybe respond to the issue of, is that literally taking away local control of local school board members? Because again, there's always that tug of war, and even though this piece of legislation doesn't directly relate to the Huron School District, what it does is it becomes a local control issue. The other one is Senate Bill 139, which is the creation and funding for the Osheti-Sakowin community-based schools. You addressed that legislatively in the past, over the last year or maybe even 2 years, and comment about one of the pieces, parts of that legislation is that it's public funds going to the equivalent, if you will, of a private school that is not controlled by the local school board. Its governing board is not a locally elected governing board, and it's not, if you will, governed by the local school district. And I guess just those two, just out of
Okay,
consideration.
thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Who would please address you two? Go ahead.
Thank you, Gary, for the question. Senate Bill 104 with the rural districts, I think I made my comments here at the first Cracker Barrel. I like local control. And so I think it's important for those local school districts to be able to elect and have those elected local officials make the decisions for that local school board. As far as Senate Bill 139, I have not looked at that close enough yet to make a determination, but I believe that was the charter school debate that they had in Education Committee just earlier this week, and so we'll be seeing it on the floor. So I'll be sure to take a look at that before we vote before that bill.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the bill here, and I looked at it a couple times. It doesn't take long to look at it. It's basically the body is not even 4 full lines long. But it starts off about the board of a sparse school district. And I thought I heard something that this maybe came out of an issue up in northwest South Dakota. But goes on to say, as defined in code such and such and such, may not designate fewer polling places than the number designated by a county commission within the school district's boundaries, unless the election is held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in June. So that'd be another one that maybe there's a real issue in that area of South Dakota, that school district, that county, whatever. But when you do a law like this out of the legislature, it's going to affect every school district across the state. And so that becomes the balancing act between local control and is this a big enough issue that it really needs a statewide policy. I do see that it was reasonably well supported out of the Senate, and it's come through our House Education Committee, again, reasonably well supported, like 9-3 votes. So it will be coming to the floor, and we'll have to deal with it there. And I guess I'm a little too new yet to try to really predict the outcome on the floor because you get a lot of surprises. But I'm not so sure that that one's going to have the same success coming through the House floor. There's a lot of what I would describe on the House floor most of the time as an allegiance or whatever to local control. So, but that's kind of the genesis of that one. And the other one, 139, I gotta apologize, like Representative Chase, I haven't studied that yet either. Try to bring that one up here.
It's been referred to House Education, so haven't been seen yet.
Okay, they haven't seen it yet. It was 139, right? Okay.
Senator, if you have some comments, and go ahead and take a look at it, we can come back to you, Lynn, on either one of those bills.
Sure, just to briefly address, Senate Bill 167, which Mr. Coffin had mentioned, is a good example of a constituent working with a legislator to fix a problem. And so he is a practitioner in the area of school law, found this area where there was some legal dispute over the interpretation of a statute relating to teacher licensure. And so he brought it to me and said, hey, there's some issues here, can we solve this? He had some, being a lawyer, he had some language already in mind on how it could be fixed. And so I put it together in a bill form, drop it, and that starts the process. And then the Department of Education came in and said, hey, we'd like to see some changes here, can we work together on this? And worked well together to come up with a good final product that everybody's on board with. That's a great way of how a citizen, any citizen who has an expertise or a knowledge in a certain area of the statutes can come to us and say, hey, we want to talk about this issue, can we see some change here? It's an area where 99% of you aren't going to care or didn't even know was in the code, because if it's not in your niche, you wouldn't necessarily know about it. But it's a good way to know that there's so much broad area out there. It's good to come with those ideas to us so we can then, if they are good ideas, we can help shepherd them along. On 104, the sparse school. So I did vote for that in the Senate, and I'll tell you why. That came to us from Senator Ryan Maher, who is the senator from Isabel, South Dakota, which is one of the largest Senate districts in the state. It's northwest South Dakota. Those districts over in northwest South Dakota get very large because there's very few people out there. And they have a lot of what are called sparse school districts. Sparse school districts are districts with a lot of land but few students. And there was a problem with a particular school district that had a lot of land. It was hundreds of miles across, and they were only doing one polling place in the town where the school was at. And they thought there was some concern that there were some intentional choices to disenfranchise other parts of the district. And so the bill is designed to say it only applies to those districts that qualify as a sparse school, and that definition exists because of funding formula questions. So we have a definition of what is a sparse school. And so they thought it was a fairness issue to say, like, in those bigger districts, you gotta have a few more than just one polling place. So we're gonna say, if your county says, here's where we put those polling places for a general election day, we're gonna use those polling places too for the school district elections, just to make sure people don't have to drive 100 miles to get to the polling place. So that's why I supported it. You know, you guys had that conversation over the House. There's obviously, I'm a firm believer in local control also. I had to think about that because my default is always local control. But there are times when the value of, you know, the fairness of the democratic process do have to outweigh that. And so in this case, it was narrow. To me, it was narrowly tailored to just sparse school districts that use that exact definition and code. So it's not going to apply to all of us. And so Huron won't be affected by it. It's not as, you don't have to drive 100 miles to get across our school district. So it just applies to that rural areas of the state.
Thank you. Anything further, Representative Schneider?
I'm just gonna go back to that Senate Bill 139. This is not like 104 that had about 4 lines. This one has 16 pages. So I really can't respond to it. I have not looked through 16 pages yet, so I apologize.
Thank you. Who would like to ask the next question? Okay, we had one handed in here. This is directed first to the two representatives, Chase and Schneider. House Bill 1163. Would you explain your reasons for your votes? Who will develop the assessment tool? What will it measure? And then they also would like to have Senator Wheeler's comment on House Bill 1163. So who wants to start here?
I will. 1163 is the kindergarten age bill. to allow 5-year-olds, or actually 4-year-olds, to be able to start kindergarten if their birthday, the way it was originally, was September 29th. And it just passed the Senate Education Committee the other day, and they amended it back to October 31st. And I held my nose when I voted for this bill in the House. I did vote yes. And I told the prime sponsor she's got to come up with ways that she's going to come up with evaluation techniques for school districts to be able to get this done. With the amendment, I looked at Senate Ed when it was passed just the other day on the 24th. That Senate committee consists of 7 people. But on that education committee, there's 1 educator. That 1 educator was the one no vote to moving it back to October 31st. If you remember a couple years ago, I had a bill that went through the House, and I moved the date of that kindergarten had to be 5 years old as of August 1 in order to enroll in kindergarten. We got that through the House. When we got to this Senate Education Committee, we ran into resistance. It was actually a day that they were missing a couple of members, and the vote was a tie. So the 1 educator that voted no just the other day, it was the one that said, let's hold off on the vote until we get the other members here. We did come out of committee, and I think it was on a 4-3 vote to go to the floor. And on the floor, it got killed. This is a big issue one way or the other, and I understand that kids need to be 5. They need, academically they can be okay, but the social abilities of what those kids have is lacking. And that's where I really have a problem when the Senate committee moved it back to October 31st. And I just looked at this bill. It's scheduled for the floor action on Monday. So we'll look to our senator to discuss this and hopefully get it either slowed or stopped. With the amendment, what happens is that that's not the way the House passed it out. So even if the Senate passes this bill, it has to come back to our chamber for concurrence. And with that new amendment, that new date, I can't support this bill, and I will vote against it. I'll speak against it, because it's important for those kids to be old enough and socially ability, or have the social skills to be good students. So, like I said, I plugged my nose when I voted yes for it. I told her she needs to come up with the standards, and it got amended worse. And so where we go from here, it goes to the Senate, but it's got to come back to our chamber as well for concurrence if it doesn't change. So it's still got a ways to go.
Representative Schneider?
Thank you. Yeah, when that bill came through the House and the floor vote and we voted, what was in front of us was allowing a September 29th or 30th date to be the 1st of September. It was about a 30-day window that you could talk about here that, well, it's supposed to be August 1st, but maybe we could go to the end of September, another 30 days, do a little more analysis of readiness for kindergarten. And so I thought, well, I'm not sure 30 days makes a lot of difference, but it didn't seem like it was that critical to me, so I voted for it. But I wasn't aware of this October 31st change in the Senate until just now. So that to me is a lot different. Although I go way back to when I was in kindergarten, that was the cutoff.
November
Like,
1st.
I mean, 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Kindergarten, December.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Kindergarten isn't kindergarten.
And so it's like, well, I don't know, I guess but I don't know what the rationale is for October 31st, but I would feel like, and that's probably not what I'll be able to support.
Senator?
Thank you. So, I've definitely gotten some contact on this one. So, the law currently says September 1 is the date for, you have to be 5 by September 1 to start kindergarten. The bill as introduced wanted to say that it's still September 1 for the kid, for every kid, but if you can pass a screening tool that says you have the maturity to go on, you could go all the way to December 31st. The original bill was all the way to December 31st. And then, and I'm just kind of tracking the kind of the evolution. This bill has been amended multiple times. Then it came out of the House saying that, well, we moved that from September 30th. So that was that month period. You basically could screen in to kindergarten if you were within a month of that date. And then apparently Senate Ed did amend it to October 31st. So now you got 2 months. You can kind of screen into kindergarten. So I have not had a lot of conversation in terms of the proponents. I don't know necessarily what the reasoning is for doing this. And so I'll be listening to a lot of conversation on it, about it, and learn the pros and cons on this. So I know there's been some conversations earlier, I think last year, the age of school start had gotten brought up. So I'll tell you, I don't know where I'm at on it. I'm looking forward to learning about it. And I'm already hearing from a lot of kindergarten teachers, so obviously that'll have a lot of sway with me, so.
Thank you.
Mike, if I can make one more comment on that.
Yes, go ahead.
I remember when I had the August 1st date 2 years ago, I believe Senator Curd is still the chairman of the Education Committee. He and I had some pretty good discussion and debate on that date. And he proudly told me about his child that was excellent in school. She had a November 15th birth date, and they somehow or another got her into school. And she was part of that class that she should have been at. If it would be up to Senator Curd, it would be January 1 of the following year is when the date would be. He really is adamant that 4-year-olds should be able to go to kindergarten. And we had a very vigorous debate when we had my August date timeline 2 years ago. So I would suspect that he might be behind the October 31st timeline.
Thank you. We're ready for another question. Come to the podium, please.
Thank you. I'm Tom Hansen from Huron. And you talked about the process, the legislative process. And it has always been the unwritten rule that every bill deserved a hearing. So I thought it was pretty inappropriate for I think it was the House State Affairs Committee, refused to hear a bill that was presented on behalf of the governor. And we always say that a bill is never really dead until it's really dead. Is there any possibility of that being resurrected as a hog house or anything, it had to do with tightening up the restrictions on abortion? So.
Thank you. Who would like to start? Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. One of the things I like trying to do when I don't have an early morning committee meeting is try to get to the State Affairs Committee, because there are so many interesting things like that go on there, but I didn't make it that day. But as I recall, yeah, that's the standard, is that, well, every bill gets a hearing. There's a technicality that first it has to be introduced, and this bill was in a draft form, and Reverend Chase certainly has more expertise in this 6 years than I do on that kind of technicality. But what was never really talked about very much, because I went to Dale Bartra, had a South Dakota Right to Life afterwards, because I was hearing conflicting things that the Right to Life organizations were not in favor of having that governor's bill go through the process. And I think, these guys can correct me, but I think that's a large reason why it didn't get that hearing. That was kind of shocking with the standard process. And the reason for that was there's this other bill, and I can't tell you the details of it either, that's going through the court system right now. And there is a big fear by the Right to Life group that if this bill that the governor was after would get introduced, would have a fairly high degree of risk of interfering with that other bill and having a wrong outcome. So that's about as much as I know, unless you guys can clarify that.
Been a strange session, Tom. And State Affairs meets at 7:45 Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. And Governor asked for this bill to be introduced and be scheduled for a hearing. And Representative Schneider is right, there is a court case pending right now that Right to Life, South Dakota Right to Life did not want this bill to be heard because they didn't want to have another state have pass this bill until that court case was settled. So, was there staging? I sure have to believe that there was. And several members on the State Affairs are very pro-abortion, or very anti-abortion. And so they didn't want to have to vote on this case. They didn't want to have their vote of record basically on an abortion bill that shows that they voted no. So that's why it didn't get a second. I remember the day because State Affairs again meets at 7:45. I had an appointment to meet with the governor at 9 a.m. on that Wednesday morning and to talk housing. And she was not pleasant at 9 o'clock that morning. And so I knew that it really upset her and disappointed her. But, you know, I agree, every bill should get a hearing, and that's what we pride ourselves in South Dakota. If you have a bill, it should be heard. Actually, nobody was the sponsor of that bill other than the governor's request for that bill. For one of those legislators to pick it up and introduce it, there wasn't enough support to do it that day.
Go ahead.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's an issue of strategy and not substance in the realm of the abortion debate. And I know that the South Dakota Right to Life was not in favor of that because of the strategic reasons. There's been an ongoing lawsuit for about 10 years in the state of South Dakota regarding abortion litigation and their abortion laws. And every time the legislature passes a bill on abortion, which as many of you know is almost every year, it affects that ongoing lawsuit. And so they wanted to finalize that lawsuit, and they want to kind of freeze the state of the law in South Dakota a little bit to try and get that lawsuit a little farther along. And so there was a strategic disagreement on how to handle the pro-life's substantive views on how they want to approach the abortion question. I think Representative Schneider said correctly that technically it wasn't a bill. The governor doesn't get to introduce bills on her own. She can request that they be introduced. But a committee or a legislator still has to introduce it for her. And so she requested that on like the last day possible to request it, and it didn't get done. And the committee declined. And so the rule still exists that every bill gets a hearing, but the bill has to get introduced first. And it didn't happen in this case, so that's kind of where that ended up.
Thank you.
Could I add just one more thing here?
Go ahead.
I mentioned the head of South Dakota Right to Life, Dale Barcher, that I personally talked to him afterwards. And I also by then had seen him on the media being interviewed. And of course, all those people that have been in this for a while, I mean, they're pretty eloquent in how they say their words and everything. But it was clear that he was explaining that we need to wait for this court decision on that lawsuit. So in a nice way, he was saying we needed to wait for that. This was otherwise getting a cart before the horse. And the second thing I'm going to say, well, I have a shot here. We talked several times already this morning about how this session is so well contentious. And Representative Chase has been watching this for 6 years and says this is like it's reached a whole new level. One of the interesting dynamics that you probably realize we have going on, within our House body of 70 people, there are 3 city representatives that are running for a statewide office. And so that adds to the dynamics of what goes on the House floor. So it's easily to be frustrated at times when you watch that too, but that's just part of how our democracy works.
Who would like to ask the next question? Okay, we have another one sent in by card. It's referencing Senate Bill 3. Wants to know how we're going to vote on Senate Bill 3, but since it's, I'm going to ask Senator Wheeler to start on that issue, and then we'll let the representatives get in.
Senate Bill 3 is the recreational marijuana bill that came out of the summer study on marijuana. So, that's the big, it's kind of the big question of, will recreational marijuana become legal through the legislature? I voted for that bill in the Senate. It passed the Senate 18-17. So it squeaked out of there. So that means the House gets to deal with it now. And that's a big step in the state. That we had one half the legislature endorse recreational marijuana. And I think that's largely on the fact that it appeared to many legislators that that's what the people wanted. That's the direction the people were moving on this issue. That after many decades of prohibition, it's time to treat marijuana more like alcohol than we treat it like heroin. So we'll see if that happens. There's also a desire, among many, myself included, that it's better to write the policy through the legislature, where there is an opportunity for debate and amendment and refinement, than to have it go through the ballot process where there isn't that opportunity. It's only up or down on whatever the ballot measure proponents wrote. So, because it's going to come, if this bill doesn't become law, which, I mean, it's got to get through the House and then has to get through the governor. So I would just predict its chances of actually becoming law aren't great, but we'll see. But if it doesn't become law, then it's going to be on the ballot, and you're going to get to vote on it again. And then I would surmise if it doesn't pass this fall, you're going to vote on it again 2 years after that. And it's going to keep coming. And so I thought it was best just get it done with. Let's put in a reasonable regulation and tax it. There was a group that had an interesting. One of the pro-marijuana groups had some displays up in the Capitol about Montana and South Dakota both voted to legalize marijuana at the same time. Montana has realized something like $2 million in tax revenue since they did that. South Dakota has received none because our Amendment A that was passed by the voters was immediately put on hold by the courts and then eventually overturned. So Montana got $2 million in tax revenue out of it, and we got zero since then. So if the policy is going to change eventually, let's just get it done the right way and start taxing it. So.
Thank you, Senator Wheeler, for sending it to the House.
Very well.
One vote would have made a big difference on this thing. I think we talked about this during our first Cracker Barrel a month ago, that, adult use marijuana is something that's probably coming. We have the ballot measure coming again this fall if we don't do something legislatively. I said it's been a tough session, and part of the tough session has been we've had tough bills like this to make the decision on one way or the other. And I'd like to hear back from a lot of you on what your thoughts are on one way or the other. I am renting a house this year with another legislator who happened to be the chair of the adult use marijuana subcommittee, summer committee last year. And he and I have had a lot of discussions on this particular subject. And I don't know if he's convinced that this is the right thing to do. He's leaning that way, and he's probably going to pull me that way as well, that if we're going to have marijuana usage, we probably want to have it done in the way that we have some control and some idea of how it's going to function and work. If we turn this bill down and kill the bill, we don't know what that initiated measure might be come this fall. I think that Amendment A passed on the heels of medicinal marijuana 2 years ago. I don't know what the outcome would be on this year's ballot measure. Do I want to gamble and say it's not going to pass and we won't have to deal with this issue? I don't know. I don't think so. I think this bill is going to have a very vivid debate in committee, probably have even more vivid and active debate on the floor. And when it comes right down to it, I don't know if it's going to be a red or a green button that I'm going to push, but it's going to be a tough decision. But The one thing I would like to have is legislators stand up and say, we're willing to take the tough votes, rather than to just say, let's let the voters decide. The voters decide who their elected officials are. We need to take the tough votes. But we'd like to hear from you and what your thoughts are, so I'd appreciate, as much as I hate to say it, I want emails, pro and con. Let me know what your thoughts are, because this will be voted on within the next probably week or a little more than a week. So, help me out.
Well, thank you. And thank you too, Senator Wheeler. But, I agree with Representative Chase's thoughts of, we could use a lot of your input, texts, emails, whatever, on where you see this. I mean, to me, it's almost amazing of all the work that's been put into this whole marijuana question, through, the legislature's summer study on marijuana, and you know, the House had their version a few days ago, House Bill 1045, and that would have had a caveat at the end of the bill that this is the law that will approve and go into effect if it gets all the way through the legislature and through the governor's signature. But the final step is it has to go on to the general ballot next fall, so that the people have a final vote on it. The other idea behind that was that the people that have their other initiated measures ready to go for recreational marijuana for this fall had been signaling pretty strongly that if you'll do that, and we think we're satisfied with the language, we will go forward with our initiative. Well, again, you pull this bill up, and I mean, the Senate Bill 3, and it's another 30 pages. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff in it. And there's been amendments along the way and so forth. So, again, my personal position on marijuana, especially recreational, is I don't favor it. So when it comes right down to it, if the Senate bill is going to be one that's up to the legislature to decide, yes or no, and there's no further, should I say, endorsement coming from, opportunity from the voters next fall, I don't know yet which one I will push either, Ed or Green. So I really do look forward to your input too, if you want to make that known in the next 2, 3, 4 days, because it'll be in front of us pretty quick.
Just one quick follow-up that I wanted to add. Shortly after the Senate passed Senate Bill 3, and I'm like within like a half an hour, there was the governor made a statement that she doesn't like marijuana, and she wouldn't sign the bill. She didn't say she wouldn't. She didn't say she would veto the bill. She said she wouldn't sign it, and those are two different things. And I don't know if she just was speaking off the cuff, or if she was intentionally reserving her options, because a bill can become law with the governor just not signing it. She doesn't have to endorse it. She doesn't have to veto it. It can just become law without her doing anything with it. I don't know if she'll take that route, but I thought it was interesting. She didn't say she'd veto it. She just said she wouldn't sign it.
Do we have one more question from the audience? Anybody? Sure, come on forward.
Good morning, legislators. Gary Wechter from Huron. I'd just like to follow up a little bit on what Senator Wheeler said about the last discussion we had. A little bit on semantics, I guess. I don't understand in my history of watching how things work. Why is it that, like in this case with Senate Bill 3, it's been voted down and voted down and voted down? And you say it keeps coming up and keeps coming up and will keep coming up. And not to step on educators' feet here, but I see the same thing happening with school bond issues. It gets voted down, it comes up. It gets voted down, it comes up. It gets voted down, it comes up, and finally it passes. And as soon as it passes, boom, it suckers in. Never another vote comes up. Why is not a no vote done and final? Why does it keep coming up until it passes? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to? Go ahead.
Thank you, Gary. Good question. But you know, as I paid attention over the years to like school bond issues, new buildings and so forth, that has happened a lot. Voters say that's too much money, we can't afford it, and so it's voted down. And one of the reasons why I guess it takes a 60% threshold to approve a, school bond issue. Well, then there'll be sometimes modifications, it'll get reworked, it'll get downsized, but if in those cases where the population of enrollment of kids and so forth, and schools busting at the seams, obviously finally something has to be done. So maybe a good thing to me many times out of those processes, it forces the powers that see the need for the building to sharpen their pencils even more and more and get better and better at trying to have a better plan. So sometimes that's an outcome. So I don't, other than that, I think all I can say is that's kind of part of how our democratic system works for the most part.
Main thing is voters have a choice. I mean, if there's a bond election, voters have the opportunity to say yes or no. And if they say no, then the plan has to be revised, reduced, whatever the case might be, in order for the next bond election to come along. Much like our legislative process, a lot of these bills, if you came up here and looked, by the time they pass either chamber or by the time they pass the legislature themselves, my God, the bills have been amended as many as 10, 12 different times with different statements, different dates, just changing one word can make an amendment to a bill. Sometimes when we have those amendments, it is to clean up the bill to make it more palatable and more reasonable for the legislature to vote on it and approve. But that's the same way with any bond issue that a county or school district would have, that make sure that what we're voting on is what the voters approve and what the school district can live with. And so amendments, changes, voting, the people still have the chance to vote and make their decision known.
Yeah, the simple answer to that question is that's the democratic process. We can't stop people from bringing ideas. We can't stop people from advocating for their ideas. And so the last time marijuana was on the ballot, I believe, was several years ago, actually, before this last year, before 2020. And then it passed. And so I don't know that that's actually maybe a good example of a situation where the marijuana bill, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was on the ballot and it failed. And then several years passed and they tried again and it passed. Well, then there were some legal problems with it, so they're going to try again. But every 2 years, people have their right to put something on the ballot, and every 2 years, things change, people change. More people become new voters, and some people move away or die, and just electorate is always changing. We can't set rules that you can't vote on something again for another 2, 4, 6 years. I don't know how long that time frame would be. And so, as long as they're advocates for an issue, they're always going to push for it. It's the same thing happens with bills in the legislature. You get told a lot that by the time a bill actually passes, it may have died 3 or 4 sessions in a row, and then finally you get the consensus around an idea and it passes. That's just a natural part of legislating, until you find enough people to vote yes on an issue, and then the people who are against it, they can put it on the ballot again 2 years from now and try and reverse the decision. That can happen. So it's the natural democratic process.
Thank you for your great questions this morning. We are going to move to closing comments, and we're going to begin with Senator David Wheeler. David?
There we go. And we got 2 weeks left to go. These will be some hot and heavy weeks, making some decisions. It's a kind of a weird and stressful session. It's probably only going to get more weird and more stressful. It's probably going to be a lot of battles to get things done, to get things across the finish line. We have a ton of spending bills that we have to make hard decisions on, and a lot of that is federal money. It's going to be in our bank account. We got to do something with it, so we really just can't not spend it. We already voted on the Senate voted on a $600 million appropriation for water projects, which I'm told is the largest appropriations bill ever in the history of South Dakota. And that's all federal money, specifically geared towards water projects. And those are the types of things that, those are, in some ways, some of those federal dollars, when they're really geared towards a certain way, it kind of makes our decision easy, because, I mean, we're gonna spend it, we're gonna get that water, we're gonna get that money out to municipalities and counties, to start doing, things, because we have to. You're federal taxpayers just as much as everybody else, and so we want to make sure that your federal tax dollars are also spent here. When it gets more difficult when you're talking general fund dollars, and there's a lot more fight over those, I think, as to how we spend our general fund reserves, and money that we know we're getting through excess from last year, or through increased sales taxes this year, or through federal dollars that may have a little more discretion in them. There's just so many different ways that we can spend that money. There's gonna be a lot of jockeying through the next couple of weeks. It'll be an interesting process to watch. Please stay in contact with us. Please continue to email us. And if there's another issue coming up, you know how to get a hold of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Lynn Schneider.
Well, thank you. You know, today I brought my little red book called Official Directory and Rules for the South Dakota Legislature, and you can't see it very good, but half of that is made up of blue and pink pages, and blue is Senate and pink is House rules, or joint rules, whatever all it is. But with all this sausage making, maybe it'd be better labeled a guide to sausage making in South Dakota. But, so there really is some guardrails to how we have to function out there. It just doesn't always feel like it's functioning well. And money probably drives the biggest hassles that we run into with each other. And again, you would think, like we said before, so much money, this should be easy. But the problem is, you see it over and over again, no matter how much money we have, it is never enough. Probably, in many cases, there are that many more good ideas than there is money. But on the other hand, one of the great things about South Dakota and its constitution is we have forced ourselves to live within a budget, and that we have to have a budget by X date every single year, which is by the end of this legislative session. So we should be really thankful for that. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to be on the front lines of this process in Pierre and learn. And so that's my goal, to try to be as effective as I can as your representative. Thank you.
Thank you, and Representative Roger Chase.
Thank you, Mike. And Mike, thank you for moderating. It's important to have a good moderator to keep a good discussion going, so we appreciate you being here. I just want to end today with the fact that, you know, we meet as a legislative body each and every year. So Gary, when good bills get passed, we're good. When bad ones get through, we can come back within a year and go after them and try to reconcile or get rid of them. So my favorite legislative session over the last 6 years was 2018. We had $13 million of extra funds that year that we could distribute. Nobody needed any money, nobody requested any money, because we didn't have any extra money to go around. And then we come to this year and we've got the exact opposite. And so we need more bankers, we need more accountants in the legislative session this year to get through all of this, but we'll get there. And you know, you heard the three of us say it's been a unique session. We're testing that little red book as far as the rules and procedures of what we're able to do, and we might just about touch on every conceivable procedural move in those rules throughout the next 2 weeks. So it's going to be exciting. You hear the three of us talk about the unique session. We love it. Get right down to it. We love it. And we're right into the fun of it right now. So we're going to get through the next 2 weeks, and we'll do our very best to make sure that things are reconciled the best that we can, and that we're spending the federal money that we're gifted or given in the right way to make long-term investments for the state of South Dakota. So we appreciate your input. Thanks again for coming out today, and be in touch. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's show our appreciation to our legislators. 2 announcements. March 8th is the Greater Heron Development Corporation and the Chamber of Commerce annual celebration at the Event Center. The theme is March Madness Team Huron. Get your tickets at the chamber and dress in your business logo or your favorite attire. Secondly, we will have an election forum right here in this room on March 26th at 9 a.m. There will be a contest for one or both the city commission and school board. So we will have an election forum the last Saturday morning with the candidates here, and you can ask them questions. Thanks for coming. Have a great day, and appreciate your interest in what's going on in the state government.